Tom Davis froze, staring at the empty space where his sculpture once stood. Not stolen, not moved, tossed in a dumpster like trash. His hands trembled as he pulled twisted metal from the wreckage, rage burning inside him. But if the HOA thought they had won, they were dead wrong. What happened next turned the whole neighborhood upside down. But let's start from the beginning. Tom Davis stood on his porch, gripping the letter in his calloused hands, his jaw tightening. The morning sun cast long shadows across his carefully tended garden, the sculptures standing silent, unaware they had just been sentenced to removal. His fingers crumpled the edges of the HOA notice as he reread the words. Immediate removal. Legal action. It felt like a threat. No, it was a threat. For over a decade, Tom had poured his heart into this space. The koi pond, the winding stone pathways, the sculptures. Each one told a story. Some were shaped from metal, others from wood, but all bore the marks of his hands, his grief, his love. His late wife, Margaret, had once called this place his living journal. And now, the HOA wanted to erase it. The demand made no sense. His sculptures had been here for years. No one had ever complained. If anything, neighbors had praised his work. He had even been asked to design pieces for community events. And yet suddenly, his art was an issue? Tom stormed down the street toward the HOA president's house, his boots grinding against the pavement. Richard Caldwell. The man was a bureaucrat with a personal vendetta, always hiding behind policies and fine print. Tom had disagreed with him once, just once, when Caldwell had tried to push an unnecessary security initiative that would have raised HOA fees through the roof. Ever since then, Tom had been on his radar. Caldwell opened the door with his usual smug expression, a cup of coffee in hand. "Tom," he said smoothly, as if he had been expecting this visit. Tom held up the letter. "What the hell is this?" Caldwell sighed, as if he were dealing with a particularly slow student. "The board has received complaints about your sculptures. They don't align with the community's uniform aesthetic." Tom narrowed his eyes. "Complaints from who?" "That's confidential," Caldwell said, his smirk widening. "You have 2 weeks." Tom's blood boiled. This wasn't about aesthetics. This was personal. Caldwell had found a way to get back at him, using HOA rules as a weapon. But Tom wasn't about to roll over. If Caldwell wanted a fight, he was about to get one. Tom spent the next week knocking on doors, hoping to gather support. Many of his neighbors nodded sympathetically, but when it came time to act, they hesitated. "I'm on your side, Tom, but I can't afford to get on the HOA's bad side," one man muttered, glancing around nervously before shutting his door. Others lowered their voices, warning him that Caldwell had been making his rounds, quietly poisoning the well. "Your sculptures are bringing down property values. They make the neighborhood look cluttered. People are starting to complain." Tom clenched his fists as he listened. He had poured years into this home, this garden, and now Caldwell was turning his own community against him with whispered lies. Then came the fines. It started with a $100 notice slipped under his door, an infraction fee for violating aesthetic guidelines. The next day, it was $500. By the third day, it doubled again. A warning followed. Failure to comply would result in legal action. HOA officials showed up at his doorstep, clipboards in hand, reciting violations as if they were reading from a script. "This is harassment," Tom snapped, standing firm on his porch. One of them barely glanced up. "It's policy." But Tom refused to back down. He wouldn't pay. He wouldn't remove a single sculpture. Then they escalated. It happened while he was out running errands. When he pulled into his driveway, something felt off. The garden looked wrong. He stepped out of his truck, his stomach tightening as he walked toward the spot near the koi pond, where his most cherished sculpture had stood. gone. His chest tightened as he spun around, searching, as if the statue had simply walked away. Then he saw it, half buried in a dumpster down the street. Tom's breath hitched as he climbed inside, frantically pulling twisted metal from the wreckage. His hands shook as he ran his fingers over the ruined sculpture. 2 iron hands intertwined, his tribute to Margaret. The last piece of her he still had, and they had tossed it like garbage. Grief and fury warred inside him, his pulse hammering in his ears. They thought they had won. That night, he sat in front of his laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard. There had to be a way to fight this. And then, he found it. Tom scrolled through page after page of legal documents, his eyes burning from exhaustion. He had spent hours searching for anything that could help him fight back. And then, there it was. A court case from a few years ago. An artist had successfully sued an HOA for destroying protected artwork under the Visual Artists' Rights Act, VERA. The law explicitly stated that certain works of art, once installed in a recognized public or private space, could not be removed or destroyed without the artist's consent. Tom's sculptures weren't just decorations. They were legally protected art. His pulse quickened. Caldwell and his cronies hadn't just bullied him. They had broken federal law. Without wasting another second, Tom picked up the phone. Emily Carter was the kind of lawyer who didn't just win cases. She enjoyed tearing bullies apart in the process. The moment Tom explained his situation, she was hooked. "They messed with the wrong artist," she said, her sharp grin practically radiating through the phone. "Let's make them regret it." The legal battle began immediately. At the next HOA meeting, Tom and Emily walked in together, and for the first time, Caldwell's confidence faltered. "We have filed a lawsuit," Emily announced, her voice cutting through the chatter. "The HOA has violated federal law. Effective immediately, all fines and enforcement actions against Mr. Davis are to be halted." Caldwell scoffed, but didn't speak. Not at first. But when Emily handed him the court documents, his face twisted in frustration. Then the shouting started. Board members argued among themselves. Some demanded they fight the lawsuit. Others panicked. They hadn't signed up for federal violations. Caldwell tried to regain control, barking about HOA authority, but Tom stood firm. "You had no right to touch my art," he said, "and now you're going to answer for it." Then the news got involved. Local reporters ate the story up. "Veteran artist takes on HOA over destroyed sculptures. Can a homeowners association control your art?" With cameras rolling, more neighbors finally spoke out. Homeowners who had feared retaliation now saw Caldwell cornered. The tide was shifting. And for the first time, Tom saw real fear in Caldwell's eyes. The day of the court ruling, the tension was unbearable. Caldwell sat smugly in the courtroom, convinced the HOA's money and influence would win. But when the judge spoke, Tom felt his heart soar. Under the Visual Artists' Rights Act, the removal and destruction of Mr. Davis's sculptures constitute an illegal violation of his rights. The court orders the HOA to restore or compensate for damages. Furthermore, all fines imposed are nullified. Caldwell turned red. Tom had won. But he didn't stop there. Using the media attention, he pushed for new HOA transparency policies, ensuring no other homeowner would suffer the same abuse. Other artists reached out, inspired by his fight. Months later, Tom's sculptures stood proudly once more, with a new addition, a bronze plaque at the entrance of his garden, reading, "Art is freedom, and freedom is worth fighting for."